My name is Naomi Prescott, and I'm 33 years old. The night my late father's lawyer announced that the family house had been left to my 6-year-old son. My mother stood up so fast her wine glass shattered across the dining room floor. Nobody moved. Nobody even looked at the broken glass. Because every single person in that room was staring at my little boy. The same child they spent years quietly treating like he didn't fully belong. My sisters looked frozen. One of my brothers-in-law actually whispered, "This can't be real." And then the lawyer cleared his throat and read my father's exact words again. To my grandson, Owen Prescott. The child I watched this family overlook for years. I felt Owen's tiny fingers grab my hand tighter under the table. Then he leaned close and whispered something that honestly still breaks me when I think about it. "Mom. Grandpa really loved me." That question hit harder than the inheritance itself. Because no child should ever grow up wondering whether they were truly accepted by their own family. But the truth is, none of this started with my father's will. It started years earlier when I ignored every warning my family gave me about the man I chose to marry. And somehow, my innocent son ended up carrying the consequences of my mistakes. Welcome back to Her Revenge Stories. Before I tell you how everything fell apart inside our family, do me a quick favor by giving this video a thumbs up and subscribing only if stories like this resonate with you. And comment what time it is where you're watching from. I always enjoy reading them. I grew up in a family people respected deeply. Not because we were rich. We weren't. But because my parents spent their entire lives building a home people trusted. My father, Leonard Prescott, was a high school principal for almost 30 years. Everybody in our town seemed to know him somehow. Former students still stopped him in grocery stores just to shake his hand and tell him how he changed their lives. My mother, Gloria Prescott, ran community outreach programs and church events like she was born organizing people. She remembered birthdays, anniversaries, doctor appointments. Honestly, sometimes I think she remembered more about other people's lives than her own. And somehow, despite raising 4 daughters under one roof, my parents managed to keep our family unusually close. That was my father's pride. Family. He believed in it deeply. Every Sunday after church, we gathered around the same long dining table eating roast chicken while my father talked about loyalty, forgiveness, and protecting each other. He always repeated, "This world is already hard enough. Home shouldn't feel like war." Back then, we believed him completely. My sisters and I were genuinely close growing up. Marlene, the oldest, was organized and responsible. Brooke was loud and funny. Tiffany had the sharpest mouth but the softest heart when nobody was looking. And me? I was the emotional one. The quiet daughter who cried during movies and wanted everybody around her happy all the time. I studied pediatric nursing in college because I loved children so much it physically hurt seeing them suffer. Honestly, I always imagined myself becoming the kind of mother who built the same warm home my father created for us. Then I met Travis Cole. And looking back now, I think my family saw the danger before I ever did. The first time Travis visited my parents' house, something felt off almost immediately. Not one huge dramatic thing. Just little things. He arrived nearly 40 minutes late wearing wrinkled clothes and expensive cologne strong enough to fill the hallway before he even stepped inside. During dinner, he interrupted my father constantly. He laughed loudly at his own jokes. Checked his phone while people were speaking. At one point, my mother asked him politely what his long-term plans were career-wise. And Travis smirked before saying, "I'm not trying to spend my life working myself to death." The table got quiet after that. I remember feeling embarrassed. But instead of listening to that feeling, I defended him. Because when you love somebody, you start translating red flags into misunderstandings. A few days later, my mother pulled me aside while we folded laundry together and said softly, "Naomi, I think you're making a mistake." I got defensive immediately. "You barely know him." She sighed. "Baby, I know behavior. Even my sisters notice things." Brooke thought he acted arrogant. Tiffany flat out called him irresponsible. And Marlene quietly asked me one night, "Do you actually feel peaceful around him?" I remember getting angry at that question. Because deep down, I already knew the answer wasn't fully yes. But I loved him. Or at least I thought I did. Then one cold evening, my father asked me to sit with him outside on the back porch after dinner. I still remember steam rising from our coffee cups while neighborhood lights glowed softly in the distance. My father rarely forced opinions on us. That was more my mother's style. He preferred observing quietly first. And that night, he looked unusually serious. "I just want you happy," he told me calmly. "If Travis is who you choose, he'll support you." Then he paused before adding softly, "But sometimes people show us who they are early." I wish I had listened harder. Because honestly, it didn't even take 8 months after the wedding for me to realize my family had been right all along. And the worst part? By then, I was already carrying his child. The first few months of marriage seemed normal enough. Not perfect, but manageable. At least that's what I kept telling myself. There were little things that bothered me early on, sure. Travis slept late almost every weekend. He forgot bills sometimes. He jumped from one job to another more than any grown man probably should. But every time something felt wrong, I found a way to explain it away. Because when you spend months defending someone against your family, admitting they were right feels almost unbearable. And honestly, I think part of me was terrified of hearing, "We warned you." So I ignored things. The first major argument happened barely 3 months into the marriage. Travis had quit another warehouse job without telling me. Again. I came home from my nursing shift exhausted, still wearing my hospital scrubs, and found him sitting on the couch in complete darkness playing video games while unopened bills covered the coffee table. I remember staring at the electric bill quietly before asking, "You quit?" He didn't even look guilty. Just shrugged. The manager was disrespectful. That was always his excuse. Everybody disrespected him. Bosses. Co-workers. Friends. Cashiers. The entire world somehow kept failing Travis. Meanwhile, I picked up extra shifts trying to keep us stable. Still, I defended him. Even to myself. Then slowly, things got worse. Travis started disappearing for entire weekends claiming he needed space. Sometimes he wouldn't answer calls for hours. Then came the late-night phone calls. The locked phone screen. The weird charges on our bank account from restaurants I'd never been to. One Friday night, around midnight, his phone buzzed while he was in the shower. I wasn't trying to snoop. Honestly. But the message lit up right there on the screen. A heart emoji. And last night was fun. I remember my stomach dropping so hard I physically sat down on the bed. But when he came out of the bathroom, I still gave him a chance to explain. That's the embarrassing part. I wanted an explanation so badly that I almost helped him lie to me. He grabbed the phone immediately and laughed lightly. "You're reading too much into things." Then he kissed my forehead like I was being unreasonable. And somehow, I let myself believe him. Or maybe I just wanted peace more than truth. A few weeks later, I found out I was pregnant. And for one brief moment, I genuinely thought the baby would fix us. I know how naive that sounds now. But I was desperate for hope. When I showed Travis the positive pregnancy test, He stared at it for several seconds before forcing a smile. Not real happiness. Forced happiness. At the time, I ignored that too. I told myself he was just shocked. But after the pregnancy, the distance between us became impossible to ignore. He stopped touching me much. Stopped asking how I felt. Some nights he didn't come home at all. Then one night while I was already 3 months pregnant, Travis stumbled into our apartment around 2 in the morning smelling like alcohol and another woman's perfume. Not subtle perfume either. Strong. Sweet. It hit me before he even reached the kitchen. I remember standing there in oversized pajamas holding a glass of water while my heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. And when I asked where he'd been, he laughed. Actually laughed. Then said, "You're too emotional lately." That sentence stayed inside my head for weeks. Not because it was loud, but because it made me feel small. Like my instincts were somehow the problem instead of his behavior. By 5 months pregnant, I barely recognized my marriage anymore. The man I defended against my entire family had become exactly who they warned me about. Cold. Careless. Sometimes cruel. One afternoon after another argument about money, I reminded him we needed to start preparing for the baby. Crib. Diapers. Doctor bills. Real responsibilities. And Travis suddenly looked directly at my stomach before saying quietly, "I never asked for this." I swear the room went silent after that. Even the television noise from the apartment next door faded for a second. Because deep down, I knew he didn't just mean the pregnancy. He meant us. I stood there frozen after he walked out the door. Still holding tiny baby clothes I had bought earlier that day. And suddenly, for the very first time, I realized something terrifying. I was about to become a mother completely alone. By the 6th month of pregnancy, Travis had basically disappeared from my life. Not officially. Not in some dramatic movie scene where he packed bags and slammed doors. Honestly, I think that would have hurt less. Instead, he faded slowly. Calls became shorter. Texts became colder. And then eventually, there were entire days where I didn't hear from him at all. At first I kept making excuses. Maybe he's stressed. Maybe he just needs time. Maybe becoming a father scared him. But deep down, I knew the truth long before I admitted it out loud. He was already leaving emotionally. And I think part of me knew that if I told my family what was happening, everything would become real. So I stayed quiet. Even when things started falling apart around me. I remember one night standing inside my tiny kitchen trying to decide whether to buy groceries or pay part of the electric bill first. That was the level things had reached. My nursing job barely covered rent anymore because Travis stopped contributing consistently. Some weeks he'd promise money and disappear before sending anything. Meanwhile my body kept getting heavier. My back hurt constantly. My ankles swelled so badly during double shifts that I started keeping an extra pair of shoes inside my locker at work because my normal sneakers stopped fitting by evening. And still, I hid everything from my family. Because every difficult moment came attached to guilt. I remembered every warning they gave me. Every uncomfortable silence during family dinners. Every worried look from my mother. Every careful conversation from my father. Especially my father. Sometimes while driving home from work late at night, I'd suddenly hear his voice in my head saying, "Sometimes people show us who they are early." And honestly, that sentence haunted me. Because he was right. They were all right. And I hated myself for not listening. Some evenings after work, I'd stop at the grocery store and wander around pretending to shop while secretly calculating prices in my head. Diapers. Baby wipes. Formula. Rent. Gas. I once stood in the baby aisle crying quietly because I couldn't decide whether I could afford both newborn clothes and groceries in the same week. Pregnancy already makes you emotional. But doing it alone, that kind of loneliness changes you. Then one afternoon in early October, Travis suddenly came back. I hadn't heard from him properly in almost 5 days. No calls. No explanation. Nothing. And then suddenly he was standing outside my apartment door like nothing had happened. For one stupid second, my heart actually lifted. I thought maybe he came back because he finally realized what he was losing. Maybe he wanted to fix things. Maybe he was scared too. I opened the door wearing oversized sweatpants and one of his old hoodies because almost none of my clothes fit anymore. My stomach was huge by then. 7 months pregnant. Exhausted all the time. Emotionally hanging by a thread. Travis walked inside slowly and sat at the kitchen table without even looking at me properly. And immediately, something felt wrong. No apology. No hug. Nothing. Then he pulled folded papers from his jacket pocket and slid them across the table toward me. Divorce papers. I actually thought I was misunderstanding what I was seeing at first. I stared at them for several seconds before finally whispering. "What is this?" Travis leaned back in the chair and rubbed his face tiredly like I was making things difficult. Then he said something I don't think he'll ever fully forget. "I just want freedom, Naomi." Freedom. I remember looking down at my stomach after he said it. At our child moving beneath my sweatshirt. And suddenly realizing he was talking about us like we were chains around his life. Not family. Not responsibility. Not love. A burden. The conversation afterward barely even felt real. He spoke calmly while I sat there trying not to completely fall apart in front of him. And the craziest part. He never once touched my stomach before leaving. Not once. After the door closed behind him, I sat frozen at the kitchen table for almost an hour staring at those papers. Then finally, I broke. I grabbed my phone and called my father crying so hard I could barely breathe. At first I couldn't even explain what happened properly. I just kept apologizing. Over and over. "I'm sorry. You were right. I messed everything up." My father stayed quiet for a long time while I cried. Then finally, in the calmest voice imaginable, he said, "Naomi. Come home." Moving back into my parents' house while heavily pregnant was one of the most humiliating experiences of my life. Not because anybody openly insulted me. Honestly, I almost wish they had. At least direct pain is easier to understand. But disappointment. Quiet disappointment sitting inside a house you once felt safe in. That kind of thing slowly eats at you. The first night back, my old bedroom still looked almost the same. Same pale blue walls. Same bookshelf near the window. My mother had even washed my childhood blankets before I arrived. And somehow that made me cry harder. Because it reminded me I was starting over in the exact same room where my parents once believed my future would be something beautiful. Instead, I came back 7 months pregnant, abandoned, and carrying divorce papers inside my purse. My mother helped me constantly after I moved in. She cooked for me. Folded baby clothes. Scheduled doctor appointments when I forgot. But underneath all of it, there was tension. Not cruelty. Not hatred. Just disappointment she didn't fully know how to hide. Sometimes she'd pause while watching me struggle to sit down and quietly say, "We tried warning you." Or, "A woman has to be careful who she builds a life with." Small comments. Soft comments. But they landed heavily anyway. And honestly, part of me believed I deserved them. That was the hardest part. Because I wasn't angry at my family yet. I was angry at myself. Then December arrived. And with it came our annual Prescott family end-of-year dinner. That tradition had existed my entire life. Every December, our house transformed into this huge noisy gathering full of food, music, relatives, and children running through hallways too fast. Normally I loved it. That year, I dreaded it. By then my stomach was huge. Walking hurt. Sleeping hurt. Existing hurt some days. Still, the house filled quickly that evening. My sisters arrived dressed beautifully beside their husbands while Christmas music played loudly downstairs. My nephews and nieces raced around the living room in matching pajamas carrying candy canes and toys. And there I was. 7 months pregnant and abandoned. I remember standing near the staircase holding a glass of ginger ale while everyone else looked so complete beside their spouses. Even simple things hurt. Watching couples laugh together in kitchens. Seeing husbands carry diaper bags. Hearing people casually ask, "Where's Travis?" Like I wouldn't immediately feel my chest tighten. At dinner, my father still tried keeping traditions alive like always. The men gave short speeches. People toasted the year. Everybody clapped and laughed. Then one of my brothers-in-law, Eric, looked toward me jokingly and said, "Well, Naomi, guess your husband's speech got cancelled this year." A few people laughed awkwardly. Not cruel laughter. Uncomfortable laughter. The kind people make when they immediately realize a joke went too far. But before the moment could fully die, my mother quietly muttered from beside her wine glass. I warned her. God. That sentence hurt more than the joke itself. Because she wasn't trying to humiliate me. She genuinely believed she had tried protecting me. And honestly, she was right. That's what made it unbearable. I suddenly couldn't breathe properly in that room anymore. The music felt too loud. The laughter felt fake. So I quietly excused myself and locked myself inside the downstairs bathroom. Then I cried silently while holding my stomach. Not delicate crying either. The ugly kind. The kind where your shoulders shake so hard you struggle catching your breath. I remember looking at my reflection afterward thinking, how did my life become this? And then something happened that I still think about years later. A soft knock came at the bathroom door. My father's voice followed gently. "Naomi." I opened the door slowly expecting another lecture. Instead, my father simply handed me a folded napkin because mascara had smeared beneath my eyes. Then he leaned quietly against the hallway wall beside me. No judgment. No long speech. Just silence for a few seconds. Then finally he said something that stayed inside me forever. Family doesn't disappear because somebody makes mistakes. That sentence broke me all over again. Because for the first time in months, I stopped feeling completely alone. And honestly, I think that was the exact moment everything between me and my father quietly changed forever. A few weeks later, I gave birth to my son, Owen Prescott. And honestly, the moment they placed him on my chest inside that hospital room, part of me healed instantly. Not completely. The pain from everything Travis didn't magically disappear. But for the first time in almost a year, I felt something stronger than fear. Love. Real love. Owen had these tiny curled fingers and the softest little cry I'd ever heard in my life. I remember staring at him through tears thinking, how could anybody walk away from this? Outside the hospital window, snow covered the parking lot in thick white layers while nurses moved quietly through the hallway changing shifts. And for a little while, nothing else mattered. Not Travis. Not divorce papers. Not embarrassment. Just my son. But reality slowly returned after we came home. And that's when I started noticing something painful. Nobody treated Owen's arrival the way they treated my sister's children. No balloons filled the house. No excited relatives rushing over with cameras. No surprise celebration dinners. Just a few polite messages in the family group chat. Congratulations. Hope you're recovering well. That was it. At first, I tried convincing myself I was overthinking things. People were busy. It was winter. Everybody had responsibilities. But deep down, I knew something felt different. Because I remembered exactly how my family acted when my sisters gave birth. The flowers. The decorated nurseries. The expensive gift baskets stacked near hospital beds. My mother crying happily while holding newborns. My sisters staying overnight helping each other with feedings. Meanwhile, I spent most nights alone in my childhood bedroom feeding Owen at 2 in the morning while the house stayed completely quiet around us. Some nights the loneliness physically hurt. Especially during those late hours when babies refuse to sleep and your whole body feels exhausted beyond explanation. I'd sit near the window wrapped in blankets while Owen slept against my chest, and honestly, sometimes I cried quietly without even knowing why anymore. Maybe hormones. Maybe grief. Maybe shame. Or maybe I was slowly realizing my son had entered the world already carrying consequences for mistakes that weren't his. One afternoon when Owen was barely 3 weeks old, my oldest sister Marlene stopped by quickly after work. She stood near the doorway still wearing her coat while scrolling through her phone. I remember thinking she looked uncomfortable holding him. Like she didn't know how emotionally close she wanted to get. After 10 minutes, she kissed my forehead lightly and said, "Well, I'm glad the baby's healthy." The baby. Not Owen. That tiny detail bothered me more than it should have. After she left, I sat there staring at the front door feeling ridiculous for being hurt over something so small. But mothers notice things. Especially when it involves their children. And slowly, I started noticing everything. Still, there was one person who treated Owen differently. My father. My father adored him quietly. Not loudly like my mother used to adore the other grandchildren. Not performative. Just steady. Gentle. Intentional. Sometimes I'd wake up from naps and find my father sitting beside the living room window rocking Owen slowly while snow drifted outside. The television muted. Coffee growing cold beside him. Just the two of them sitting there peacefully together. And my father rarely said much. That was his nature. He observed more than he spoke. But with Owen, I noticed little things. The way his face softened whenever the baby smiled. The way he always volunteered to hold him after dinner. The way he quietly bought small things for him without mentioning it to anyone else. One evening, I walked downstairs around midnight because Owen started crying. And I found my father already awake in the kitchen warming a bottle. I looked confused and asked, "Dad, why are you still up?" He shrugged casually. He sounded hungry. Then he handed me the bottle and added softly, "You should sleep when you can." That moment nearly made me cry. Because nobody else seemed to notice how exhausted I was becoming. But my father noticed everything. And honestly, I think Owen noticed it too. Even as a baby, he calmed differently around him. Like somehow, he already understood who felt safe. As Owen grew older, the exclusions became impossible to ignore. When he was younger, I could still distract him. A hug worked. A movie worked. Cookies and cartoons worked. But children grow. And eventually they start noticing patterns adults pretend not to see. Every Christmas at my parents' house followed the same routine. The huge tree near the fireplace. Christmas music playing too loudly. My sister's children running around in matching pajamas while wrapping paper covered the floor. And every year, somehow, Owen received less. At first, I truly convinced myself it was accidental. Maybe my mother forgot. Maybe money was tighter. Maybe I was being overly sensitive because of everything with Travis. But then it kept happening. Again. And again. And again. One year, my mother handed giant gift bags to every grandchild in the room. Bright wrapping paper. Bows. Expensive toys sticking out the top. Then suddenly, the gifts stopped. Owen sat quietly beside me waiting patiently while the other children ripped open boxes around him laughing loudly. I remember him glancing toward the tree again like maybe there was still one hidden underneath somewhere. My father noticed too. Of course he did. He looked toward my mother and asked quietly, "What about him?" And my mother barely looked up from her coffee before replying, "I simply forgot." Forgot. Such a small word. But somehow she never forgot the others. Never once. I remember my chest tightening so badly I thought I might actually say something that night. But then Owen climbed onto the carpet beside his cousins and started playing with their toys instead. Like he was trying to convince himself it didn't matter. That somehow hurt worse. By 4 years old, he finally noticed the difference himself. That Christmas night, after everybody left, I was helping him change into pajamas when he suddenly looked up at me quietly and asked, "Mom, did Grandma forget me again?" God. I still hear that question sometimes when the house gets quiet. Because there was no anger in his voice. No attitude. Just confusion. Pure little boy confusion. Like he genuinely believed there had to be a reason. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at him for several seconds before pulling him into my lap. And honestly, something broke inside me that night. Because whatever mistakes I made with Travis, whatever disappointment my family carried toward me, none of it belonged on my son. Owen was innocent. Completely innocent. And yet somehow he kept paying emotional consequences for choices he never made. After that Christmas, things between my mother and me became strained in ways we stopped discussing openly. No screaming fights. No dramatic confrontations. Just distance. Cold little silences. Then the following spring, everything changed again. My father died unexpectedly from a stroke. One normal Tuesday morning he was drinking coffee and reading the newspaper in his recliner. By afternoon, he was gone. Just like that. Honestly, losing him felt unreal. But watching Owen lose him hurt even more. Because my father was the only person in our family who loved that child openly without conditions attached. The funeral happened 3 days later. Rain poured almost the entire morning. People filled the church carrying umbrellas and casseroles while soft organ music played near the altar. And somehow, even grief didn't fully soften my family. Near the front of the church, rows had been reserved for the grandchildren. Little name cards sat neatly on seats beside my sister's children. Every grandchild had one. Except Owen. He stood beside me in his tiny black suit holding my hand while staring at the other kids sitting together near the front. Then he looked up at me quietly and asked, "Why can't I sit with the other kids?" I nearly lost it right there in the pew. Because there are moments as a mother when you realize your child is slowly becoming aware of rejection in real time. And nothing prepares you for that feeling. I crouched beside him immediately and whispered, "Stay with me, baby." But honestly, my voice sounded shaky even to myself. Across the church, my mother kept greeting guests like nothing was wrong. My sisters avoided eye contact. And I sat there beside my son during my father's funeral, realizing something devastating. The only person who consistently made Owen feel fully loved was now gone. And suddenly, the world felt much colder for both of us. That Christmas after my father's funeral felt painfully empty. Same decorations. Same staircase lights. Same giant tree near the fireplace glowing softly in the corner. But without my father in the house, everything felt wrong. The laughter sounded forced. The conversations felt careful. Even the music playing through the speakers somehow made the silence underneath more obvious. And honestly, I almost didn't attend that year. Part of me wanted to stay home with Owen and avoid pretending everything was normal. But family traditions mattered deeply to my father. So I went anyway. The house filled slowly that evening. My sisters arrived carrying trays of food while their children ran through the hallways yelling at each other. Husbands stood near the kitchen drinking beer and talking football. And through all of it, Owen stayed glued quietly beside me. I noticed something about him after my father died. He became more observant. Like he was constantly trying to read rooms before fully entering them. At 6 years old. That alone broke my heart. Then sometime after dinner, the front door opened and my father's lawyer walked inside carrying a leather briefcase. Immediately the energy inside the room shifted. Conversations slowed. My mother straightened in her chair near the fireplace. And one of my brothers-in-law muttered, "Guess this is the estate stuff." Everybody assumed the same thing. Basic legal business. Property division. Paperwork. Nothing dramatic. The lawyer greeted everyone politely before sitting at the dining table and opening several folders carefully. At first, the reading felt completely normal. Savings accounts divided equally between the daughters. Retirement investments shared fairly. Small donations to charities my father supported. Honestly, everything sounded exactly like my father. Fair. Calm. Balanced. Then suddenly, the lawyer stopped speaking. He adjusted his glasses slowly while flipping to another page inside the folder. And I swear something changed in the room right then. Even the children quieted down. Then the lawyer cleared his throat softly and said, "To my grandson, Owen Prescott." The entire room froze instantly. My mother frowned immediately. Not angry at first. Confused. Like she genuinely thought she heard wrong. Beside me, Owen looked up quietly after hearing his name. My sisters exchanged nervous glances almost immediately. Then the lawyer continued reading my father's exact words. Slowly. Carefully. Like he understood how heavy they were. I noticed far more than people believed I did. Nobody moved. Nobody even reached for their drinks anymore. The lawyer continued. Especially the way this child was treated. God. The silence after that sentence felt enormous. One of my sisters immediately looked down at the floor. Another covered her mouth softly. And my mother. My mother went completely pale. Because suddenly everybody understood what this was really about. Not money. Truth. My father had seen everything all along. Every forgotten birthday. Every missing Christmas gift. Every family photo Owen got excluded from. Every awkward silence after cruel comments nobody challenged. The lawyer continued reading while my chest pounded so hard I could barely breathe. Then came the moment that completely shattered the room. To Owen Prescott, I leave my largest property investment. A sharp inhale echoed somewhere near the kitchen. But the lawyer wasn't finished. Not even close. He looked directly at my mother before reading the next line. And the Prescott family home. The exact house we were sitting inside. For a second, nobody reacted. I genuinely think the shock was too big to process immediately. Then suddenly my mother covered her mouth with trembling hands. "No," she whispered. One of my sisters started crying almost instantly. Another kept repeating, "Dad wouldn't do this. Dad wouldn't do this." But he did. Because my father wasn't rewarding Owen for being blood. He was protecting the only grandchild he believed had been emotionally abandoned inside this family. And honestly, deep down, everybody knew it. The room slowly descended into chaos after that. Voices overlapping. Questions everywhere. One of my brothers-in-law started arguing with the lawyer. My mother looked like she could barely breathe. And through all of it, Owen sat quietly beside me trying to understand why everybody suddenly looked at him differently. Then he tugged gently on my sleeve. I looked down. And my sweet little boy whispered something that honestly still destroys me every time I remember it. "So Grandpa loved me for real. Not, we're rich now. Not, we got the house. No." That was his question. Because after years of feeling unwanted, all he truly needed was proof somebody saw him completely. I couldn't even answer him right away. I just pulled him against my chest and held him tightly while the entire room slowly fell apart around us. The silence after the will reading felt unbearable. Not normal silence either. The heavy kind. The kind where everybody suddenly becomes aware of things they spent years trying not to acknowledge. Nobody touched their food anymore. Christmas music still played softly from the speakers somewhere in the background, which honestly made everything feel worse somehow. Because the house still looked festive while the family inside it quietly fell apart. My sisters sat frozen around the dining table staring at copies of the will like the words might magically rearrange themselves if they looked long enough. One of my brothers-in-law kept rubbing his forehead nervously. Another stood near the kitchen pretending to read legal papers while clearly avoiding eye contact with everybody else. And my mother. I had never seen my mother cry like that before. Not even during my father's funeral. She sat there shaking silently with mascara running down her cheeks while my father's lawyer packed documents back into his briefcase. Honestly, part of me thought she was crying over the house at first. But then I looked at Owen. And suddenly I understood. This wasn't about property anymore. It was about guilt. Years of guilt finally crashing into people all at once. My oldest sister Marlene suddenly started speaking first. Fast. Nervous. Like silence itself made her uncomfortable. "We never meant for him to feel unwanted." Then Brooke immediately added. "Nobody hated Owen." And Tiffany, the same sister who once explained to her daughter why Owen didn't really have a father around, started crying quietly into her napkin. Everybody suddenly had explanations. Reasons. Excuses. But the truth sat openly in the middle of the room now. And no amount of talking could erase years of quiet rejection. Then something happened I genuinely never expected. My mother stood up slowly from her chair and walked toward Owen. Not confidently. Carefully. Almost like she wasn't sure she deserved to get close to him anymore. The entire room watched silently. Even the children stopped talking. Then my mother knelt beside him. Actually knelt. I don't think I had ever seen my mother kneel for anyone in my entire life. Her hands shook while she reached forward carefully and touched Owen's cheek. And when she finally spoke, her voice sounded completely broken. "I am so sorry." Owen looked confused more than anything. Because children don't always understand complicated adult guilt. They just understand how people make them feel. My mother started crying harder. Not dramatic crying. Real crying. The kind people do when regret finally becomes too heavy to carry quietly. "You didn't deserve any of this," she whispered. And honestly, That moment hurt almost more than the rejection itself. Because suddenly I realized something devastating. She knew. Maybe not fully at first. Maybe not intentionally. But somewhere deep down, my mother had known for years that Owen was being treated differently. And she allowed it anyway. That realization sat inside my chest like concrete. Around us, the room stayed painfully tense. One of my sisters walked outside crying. Another started arguing quietly with her husband near the hallway. The lawyer kept speaking softly with my brothers-in-law about legal details, but nobody seemed fully focused anymore. Because the real inheritance my father left behind wasn't the house. It was exposure. Truth. He forced this family to finally confront themselves. Later that night, while everybody argued downstairs in exhausted whispers about property, paperwork, and what Dad really meant, I found Owen upstairs sitting quietly inside my father's old study. The room still smelled faintly like coffee and old books. My father's reading glasses remained folded neatly beside his favorite chair exactly where he left them before he died. And Owen sat curled beside that chair holding one of my father's old coffee mugs tightly against his chest. Like it was something fragile. Something important. I sat beside him quietly for a moment before asking softly, "You okay, baby?" He looked down at the mug for several seconds before answering. Grandpa really saw me. Not a question this time. A realization. And honestly, hearing that nearly broke me all over again. Because after everything, after years of feeling forgotten inside his own family, all my son truly wanted was to know somebody loved him without conditions attached. Over the following months, my family tried rebuilding what they had broken. At first, it felt strange. Almost uncomfortable. Like everybody suddenly woke up from the same long dream at the same time. My sisters started inviting Owen everywhere. Birthday dinners. School events. Weekend outings with their children. The same people who once treated him like an afterthought suddenly fought over who got to spend time with him longer. And honestly, part of me didn't know whether to feel relieved or angry. Because where was all this love when he was 4 years old asking me why Grandma forgot his Christmas gifts? Where was this energy when he sat alone at family parties watching his cousins tear open presents while pretending he wasn't hurt? My mother changed the most. Almost overnight. She started calling constantly. Checking on Owen's school. Asking about his favorite foods. Sending birthday gifts weeks early like she was terrified of forgetting again. One afternoon she even showed up at my apartment carrying 3 shopping bags full of winter clothes for him. I remember watching her fold tiny sweaters on my couch while trying not to cry. Because part of me knew she was genuinely trying. But another part of me couldn't forget all the years my son spent feeling invisible inside his own family. And healing. Real healing. Doesn't happen just because people finally feel guilty. Especially for children. Children remember things differently. Adults move on from moments. Children build identities from them. That's the part people forget. Owen never became rude after the inheritance. Never arrogant. Never disrespectful. If anything, he became quieter. More thoughtful. Sometimes I'd catch him studying people's faces during family gatherings now, almost like he was still trying to figure out whether the love around him was finally real. And honestly, that broke my heart more than the rejection ever did. Because no child should grow up questioning affection. One evening about 6 months later, I came home from work and found Owen sitting quietly inside my father's old recliner. After the will reading, my mother insisted I keep several of my father's belongings for Owen. The recliner. His old coffee mugs. Some books. Little things that smelled like him. That night rain tapped softly against the apartment windows while Owen sat curled inside the oversized chair holding a framed photograph of himself beside Grandpa Leonard at the lake 2 summers before he died. My father had one arm around him in the picture while Owen smiled proudly holding a tiny fishing rod twice his size. I stood there watching my son trace the edge of the frame quietly with his finger. Then he looked up at me softly and asked, "Grandpa saw me the whole time, didn't he?" God. That question nearly broke me all over again. Because after everything, after years of exclusion, after all the forgotten birthdays and quiet humiliations, my son still wasn't focused on the house, or the money, or revenge. All he cared about was knowing somebody truly loved him. Completely. Without conditions attached. I sat beside him slowly and kissed the top of his head. Then I whispered, "Yeah, baby. He did." And honestly, I think that was all my father ever wanted Owen to know before he died. Not that he inherited property. Not that he won. Just that he mattered. That he was seen. That somebody noticed every silent tear he tried hiding. Every forced smile during Christmas mornings. Every moment he questioned whether he belonged. My father saw all of it. And in the end, he made sure Owen knew it too. So now I want to ask you something honestly. Do you think my family truly changed because they finally realized they were wrong? Or because my father forced them to confront themselves publicly? And if you were in my position, would you fully forgive them? Or would some wounds stay with you forever? If this story touched your heart even a little, do me a favor and leave a thumbs up on the video. Subscribe to her revenge stories for more emotional true life inspired stories like this one. And share this video with somebody who needs the reminder that children should never carry punishment for adult mistakes. Also, before you go, check out the other stories on this channel. Some of them might stay with you longer than you expect.